Abhijeet Hazarika began his career in tea in the early 1980s in the Calcutta sale room at Brook Bond Limited. He joined Tata Tea in 1991 and worked in tea buying and blending in Guwahati, Bangalore, and Kolkata for 18 years before moving to London, where he worked for nearly 7 years in product management and supply management for Tata Global Beverages. He has a home in Bangalore and has worked as a tea and process innovation consultant at Tea Sigma Consultancy based in Assam for 5 years. 3 years ago, Abhijeet leased a small farm and factory at Bornoi, Assam, to conduct practical experiments on increasing tea productivity. The 8 staff members, including the factory manager, produced more than 700,000 kilos of made-to-order tea sold directly to wholesalers. He explains that labor accounts for 60% of the typical estate's operating expense, and the labor cost is increasing. Quote, "Input costs are going to keep on increasing. The only way to neutralize this is to increase productivity and efficiency on the farm." What is the driving force behind your pursuit of frugal innovation in tea? What motivates you?
My grandmother was probably the first woman planter in the history of Assam. So she used to run a tea garden called Korangani. And my grandfather actually, clear jungles to be able to create around 4 gardens in his time. My family has always been in tea from my mother's side. And so I have grown up among people who were passionate about tea, people who lived their life in tea. And I drew a lot of inspiration from my grandmother, who, at that time used to actually go to the factory with gumboots and being able to walk in the rain and stuff like that. It always left an impression that, that there's so much, you can do if you really want to, and, there's nothing that holds you back. My uncle is also looked after the garden, and both also, in my view, great innovators of their time, although they are probably not spoken about. And they did a lot of work in the tea garden. I have been in tea for, nearly 4 decades. So what I am today is only because of tea. And I think, whatever little I can give back, to tea, I am always trying to see the opportunity. There are probably very few people who have seen the different parts of tea, the commercial aspects of tea, more than anything else. And also having the opportunity to work in big organizations who have actually driven, you can use the word IT, to actually benefit from, from the power of technology. So all that together, I think, makes a combination which makes it interesting for me to look at tea not as a problem, but as an opportunity. And to see how, we could actually, make even one life better. I think that itself is my motivation, that, let's make one day better.
What are the most effective applications of technology in tea cultivation?
If you put a problem statement, what is the most important thing to change in tea? I would think it is, number one, the ability to reduce the number of people in the entire process. I think that's the biggest one. But you have to do it in such a way that, it is not harmful in any way. You are not depriving anybody of what they were entitled to because they were born in an estate or they lived in an estate. But at the same time, in order to make their lives better, you have to change status quo, because otherwise it's just going downhill.
At Bornoi, workers using the experimental electronic harvester you are developing with Robo6 Labs harvest far more green leaf per day than pluckers working on surrounding farms.
An average plucking of around 27 to 28 kgs per worker, you have to make it go up to at least 300 kgs. That's the only way you will be able to maintain your garden. Technology has to start in the field in terms of harvesting. Because without that, your cost of production in no way can come down. The second use of technology, of course, is use of better ways of monitoring the garden. Now it could drones, it could be a lot of other aerial surveillances. And we need to understand that, there is really so much you can spend, on an estate because it's not cost optimum. You're back to square A. Yeah, yeah. Actually, apart from the obvious advantages of harvesting, I think in terms of the ability for technology to bring in surveillance, and I think surveillance, whether it is aerial, whether it is anything else, to be able to actually bring down some of the other costs related to pest attacks and stuff like that is interesting areas which are developing. But in my view, they are very expensive as of now. And, because given the last large areas which are under tea, I think there has to become a time when, something more frugal needs to be done. Just looking at drones or just looking at satellite images is good, but I think there would have to become something much more cost effective because the area is very large. In the uh, way that we do manufacture, I think there are a lot of variables which one needs to take care of, and that's where probably technology will help us. But in my own experience, when we have been running factories, I think every aspect of manufacture is so closely related that in many cases that it is not possible to actually get the right flow in an optimized way to be able to give you the best product at the lowest cost. For example, even a small thing like the feed rate, into your CTC, could actually impact the way your CFMs run, how your dryers run. And, one thing I think which is probably not, evident is the lack of technical training that you can give your workers who run the factory. I'm not talking about the people on maintenance and all. I'm talking about the daily people who come to actually run the factory for you. There is so much of variation among people that that to get a standardized process as we know it, is very, very difficult. So technology does have an important role to play in every aspect of tea, but again, the cost has to be within something that is disproportionate in terms of the benefits that it is able to bring in. And I think that's the riddle which only frugal innovation can actually help, because doing high cost changes will never pay off for a commodity which has always been marketed as a poor man's drink, and that's going to be the problem.
You mentioned steady progress in improving the electronic tea harvester, which is now undergoing field trials.
The challenges is in terms of the overall deployment of mandate or say workers in the field, and how you are able to reduce the cost. And we worked for 4 years and ran into major disasters as in the first 3 years, because we were trying to do something which worked within the lanes between two bushes and not go over the bush, because that was the only way we could reduce cost. We wanted to, bring in the latest technology in terms of electronics, so that, we were able to, make it future-proof. Because in our view, having something which was probably mechanical was outdated to start with, and therefore we went and tried, and everything was done in-house in terms of design and manufacturing the components, etc. So I think this year has been a good year for us in terms of trials. We've been able to, cover about 1 hectare in 8 hours. And of course, output will depend on what is on the bush. So, output is not important. It's just our aim is to get to 0.15 hectares per hour on a normal speed. And for that, a bit of work to be done in terms of small things like, when we did a study, we found that the number of times we were changing the bags as compared to a worker using a harvester was probably 5x more. I mean, it's a very small thing, but actually it is costing us a lot of time on the ground. We have been learning every year, and I think as a person, very confident that this will work. Now, whether it's a commercial success or not, I think is not something I want to think about. But it has really taught us a lot. If you are going to have a Frugal machine like this, a Frugal means as compared to anything else which is available, and you can reduce the number of man days but get better or equally good output. I think there is a future, and I was thinking more in terms of using this machine for agri entrepreneurs in Assam. My dream and is that if we could take educated youth and make them into agri entrepreneurs using this machine, using drones, using sensors, and servicing the small tea growers farms where the small tea grower did not have to worry about anything because the agri entrepreneurs were taking care of the entire back end process. Then I think it would bring in two major changes. One is it would bring in standardized quality because these agri entrepreneurs would have been trained or could be trained rather than training 500 small tea growers. And secondly, I think it will reduce the migration of educated and talented youth from the villages of Assam or West Bengal, to very mundane paying jobs in big cities, which I think is a huge loss of talent for a state. So for me, I think those are the two most important success factors if it ever came true. It's not so much of the commercial earnings.
The relentless focus on improving yield to increase volume has been challenged. Will you address whether improving tea quality pays off for the people who do the work? Is the additional effort being rewarded?
We had, taken a bottling factory on lease, for about 2 years with the express purpose of trying to improve, the earnings of the small tea growers by improving the quality of the tea that we made, and therefore also encouraging them to, follow good manufacturing, good agricultural practices, and making the factory also follow good manufacturing processes. Now we did improve, the leaf quality. We did improve the quality of the made tea. But then I think, the gap is so small between, making a good tea and the best tea and getting the best price and the medium price that, it's a gamble and it may not always pay off. So, the amount of expenditure that you make in trying to move from, what I call as a B index T to an A index T may not always pay off in terms of the final price that you realize. That's been my experience over the last 2 years. That is something that one needs to be very careful about because one thing is very clear that you cannot sacrifice volume, and just look at the variable cost. So, that is the biggest challenge that anybody who is in tea realizes day in, day out. And the second is, I think, the cash flow. I think one of the biggest problems in the tea industry is the cash flow. Like a small tea grower has to be paid within, say 14 days or 7 days or whatever you've got an agreement with. But, you as a producer or a factory owner will not get paid within, more than 21 days. And that's where, cash flow becomes one of the biggest challenges that, that you need to manage. There are so many of these problems, but, when you are addressing them one by one, you begin to realize that, everything is so interconnected that, there is no one solution to this entire thing. And I think everybody is looking at one solution, but that's going to be very difficult.
I admire your factory experiment addressing the daily problems of tea cultivation. Every process can be improved and made more efficient and economical, but persistently low prices at the farm gate undermine that effort. In tea, the upper end of the supply chain is still not compensating the lower end for their work.
See, the way I can speak specifically for India at large, because I spent most of my time as a buyer blender in India, and I have seen quality evolve in India over a period of time. So if you looked at India, say when I started my career, at that point of time, there was a huge amount of tea, which was what we call as loose tea or unbranded tea, right? Even now, 400 million kgs of tea approximately would be in the unbranded segment. What we call as the general trade, or, what we call as the local buyers, play a huge influence. Now, the way I have seen, brands panning out over the last 2-3 decades that I have been closely associated with, is that, that while there was a lot of interest among the big players in, capturing value at the, medium or the top end of the pyramid, I think over the last maybe 10, 15 years, everybody has begun to realize that the volume lies at the bottom. And so, there has been a huge amount of, branded activity now happening at the bottom of the pyramid. And majority of the shares of very large companies are actually coming from that. And that's a reality because, the fact is that the market will be determined by what people are not only willing to pay, but also able to pay. Okay, so if you look at, it's very nice and very heartening when people talk about, value. But people need to realize that many of the people, for them, tea still is a luxury, okay, because they can't really afford to drink tea by sacrificing something else, okay? So they will always look for value. Now, for them, value is in many cases not taste. It is something that's probably just having, a tea which fulfills the basic need.
Produced by Adavita Studios. Connect your voice to the world.